Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to continue our discussion we started in the previous video about getting into live steam, specifically G-Gauge live steam. In the first video we talked about clubs and options about getting into the hobby itself. We talked a little bit about locomotives to get. Tonight, after some friends chimed in and said, hey, you forgot these, the starter locomotives. I kind of looked them up today, and I'm talking specifically about the Roundhouse company that's out of England, and they make a Sammy and a Birdie, which are very similar to the Ruby in concept. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're fine little engines. They run great. Personally, like I think I said before, I do not have any Roundhouse locomotives, and it's just the way things have worked out. It's not a jab at Roundhouse at all, because I have several friends who have Roundhouse locomotives and they run great. The other thing we're going to talk about a little later on is some reading material that a friend of mine reminded me of, and a copy of a book that I have, and we'll talk about that in a little while. In the meantime, let's talk a little bit more about Ruby, and we're going to talk about the other two as well, but because they're all very similar. Like I said, the Ruby's a little cheaper price point wise than the two Roundhouse products, but they're all very similar. So we have Ruby, and Ruby weighs 6 to 8 pounds, not very heavy. This version of Ruby, the cab comes off completely, so you can see the cab, fuel tank, throttle, cater on this side over here, and you see that the smoke box open, and you light it from the smoke box end. We also need to discuss a little bit, once you get a locomotive, about the items you will need to actually run the locomotive. Unlike electric locomotives, you will need several things to make this engine go before you ever get started. They're all very simple, nothing really complicated here. One of the first things you need is fuel, butane specifically. You can buy them in cans like this from most big box stores, or even some supermarkets have them. There's large cans like this. There's slightly smaller cans. They have a top valve that when you push down, the gas will go into the tank. Sometimes you need an adapter piece to extend out. That's very important. The next thing you need, and this is particularly important, is steam cylinder oil. This goes in the lubricator of the engine, and its primary purpose is to lubricate the cylinders while you're running. Very few oils are actually formulated to work in the high temperature, high pressure environment that is the cylinders of a locomotive. So this stuff does that. This happens to be the version you can get from AccuCraft. Roundhouse has their own version. Not sure if Regner does, and we'll talk about those guys in a little later. Another thing you need that's very important is plain old lubricating oil. All the moving pieces on a steam engine, the side rods, the bearings, the eccentric straps, and everything else need to be lubricated. And any type of lubricating type oil, this happens to obviously be 3-in-1, works great for it. The other thing you need, and probably the most important one of the bunch, is water, and in this case specifically distilled water. You do not want to have dissolved solids like what you have in tap water and mineral water going through your locomotive, because as the water boils off, you will get evaporated solids that will clog up areas in your steam engine. Some of the passages are very, very small. The last thing you need to make this all go, very simple thing, is a lighter. And notice I'm using these long nose lighters. To me, one thing I've noticed is that, especially in the beginning and even afterwards, some people will turn the gas valve too high at first when they light their steam locomotive, and you get a tremendous fireball out the front of the locomotive. The farther your hand is away from where you're lighting, the better off you are. Now, Roundhouse engines, you don't open the firebox or the smoke box door to light. You light them at the top of the stack, which has advantages and disadvantages. Personally, I prefer lighting at the smoke box because that's closer to the gas source that's coming down the fire tube inside the boiler. And the thing that you want to do before you turn on the gas valve is make sure there's a flame coming out of your lighter, or torch as the English call it, and That way you don't have a huge cloud of gas in the front of the locomotive. And if you do it backwards, we open the gas valve first and then light it, what you'll have is an exciting and brief little fireball. And most of us have done it. Anybody that says they haven't is probably lying to you, but we've all done it. And it's something you learn, that light the lighter before you turn on the gas. Now, on the subject of gas and on the subject of throttles, you learn the phrase to crack the valve. And you don't want to turn it a half turn. You don't want to turn it a quarter turn. You don't even want to turn it an eighth turn. You crack it and just barely turn it to where you can have gas in the gas case coming through the fire tube so it can burn. If you turn it up too high, you'll also get a nice little fireball, or you'll have a flame shooting out the front of the engine, which you don't want. You'll have to turn it back down. And one thing you learn over time is each gas valve has a little bit different action to it, shall we say, and it will react differently. The other thing is on the throttles. Some throttles are very, very sensitive. I find on my Iuki, which I've shown in a couple of my past videos, when it's cold, it has a very, very sensitive throttle, and just the slightest bit it'll take off, and then you get to go chase it. Rubies are similar. My big engines, they've got a little bit more going on, so they're not quite as bad, but you still do not want to open the throttle too far on any of these locomotives, or else you're going to run, and because they can really take off. Another thing I'd like to discuss, and some of my friends do this, I personally don't, and I'll explain why, is radio control. I worked at a steel mill about 20 years ago, and all the locomotives in the fleet were radio control options. So you could make a switch, flip a switch over and make it either radio control or control it manually like normal. And what I found on the remotes was you had no feel, and you would open the throttle too fast and you'd spin the wheels, and then to stop, instead of applying the brakes, you'd let go of the safety bar and the wheels would slide. And on a 100-something ton locomotive, sliding's not good and spinning the wheels isn't good. You'll either dig holes in the rail when you spin the wheels, or you'll flat spot the wheels as you're sliding. Every one of those locomotives had flat spots, and it was a rather bumpy ride. In small scale G-gauge light steamers, you're probably not going to dig holes in the rail, and you're probably not going to flat spot the wheels. There just isn't enough mass in the different materials between the wheels and the rails. It's just a little different. The one thing you are going to do is when you take off, and I've seen a lot of people do this with RC, is they turn the throttle on too far and they still spin the wheels, and that's very hard on side rods, valve gear, and everything else. Over time it'll wear the engine out, whereas if you do it nice and smooth, it's a nice smooth transition, and you're not going to bang all the bolts at the various connections and make the hole bigger. The other thing that you will do is you will just let off the throttle, and again the engine will slide, especially if you have a train behind it, and sometimes you'll slide a couple of feet. That jarring motion when you stop and the wheels stop turning will also jar the rest of the drive system, side rods or gears, depending on the type of the locomotive. So I'm not really into radio control. I was thinking about it on a couple of my engines early on, and after watching and remembering what I was doing at the steel mill, I decided not to. It's a little bit more hands-on. Granted, you have to follow the engine a little bit more, which you probably should do on any railroad anyway, especially if there's multiple people on the same track, and give it nice smooth starts and stops. One thing that you find out quickly is the mass of these things. And Ruby, even a little engine like Ruby or a Sammy or a Birdie, still weighs 5 or 6 pounds. My big Forneys that you've seen on a couple of my other videos, those things are 45 pounds empty, and when you're full up, you're close to 50 pounds. So there's quite a little bit of mass there, and you put a train behind it, and the train weighs 20 more pounds beyond that. So you got a pretty heavy load going on. So it's something to keep in mind. You can hear it a little bit when the slack runs in and out on an HO train, even if you have KDs or any of the little knuckle couplers, but it's something to think about. The thing that I want to kind of touch on is kind of a engineering and educational experience is this. It's a book called A Passion for Steam. This was written by Mark Horowitz. He put it out like 5 or 6 years ago. This is available through Accucraft. You can go to their website and order one. They're not that expensive. I'm not making any money on it. Personally, I don't know Mark. He's a good guy. I know people that do know him. But most of the engines that are in here, and there's about 60 or 70 locomotives at least, are all of his own personal collection. The other thing this book does, it'll explain some of the things you need to know, both technically about the locomotives as far as valve gear and as far as the way the fuels work and why, the way to lubricate. They're all in the front of the book, so it's pretty educational. It's well put together, and like I said, it's available through Accucraft. I highly recommend it. My friend Colton reminded me last night about this, and it was like, oh yeah, that'd be a good idea. So here it is. Like I said, most of the locomotives in here, if not all of them, belong to Mark himself. For those of you who don't know Mark, or maybe have heard of him in the past, and maybe the name's familiar, Mark is one of the guys that started putting live steam on the map in the United States, so to speak. He organized one of the first magazines called Garden Railways Magazine. Later on, he did Steam in the Garden. And he was one of the first ones to have live steam and start putting together the community that is the live steam community throughout the United States. Over time, he has also collected, obviously by the book, several dozen locomotives of various gauges and sizes and manufacturers. So he's very knowledgeable. I know he's still active in the hobby. As far as I know, at making this video, I believe he's actually scratch building a locomotive right now. I don't know too much about it. Like I say, he lives in Colorado, where I'm in Northern California, so a lot of differences there. But anyway, that's some good stuff to think about as you're getting further on, because getting into the hobby, okay, what's the next step? Well, here's the next step, because you will need several things to make these things go, as I said earlier. Tomorrow, or the next video, we're probably going to expand a little bit more into the locomotives, some of the ones that are in my personal collection. I'm going to show you my first locomotive, which was not a Ruby, and it's a little different. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next video.